Hello everyone and welcome back to the new YouTube video where we will be talking about Gandhiji's autobiography, the story of my experiments with the truth. On 2nd October 1989, Gandhiji was born in a Vaisnavite family in Porbandar, Gujarat. Gandhiji was the youngest and used to be very shy, which he later described as a virtue. Silence is a part of the spiritual discipline of a votary of truth, taught him the value of words. It was in his first year of high school when the famous incident when during inspection he was prompted by his teacher to cheat and copy the spelling of cattle, and which he did not, and this did not diminish his respect for the teacher. He by nature was blind to the fault of the elders, and he learned to carry out the order of the elders. Cut to when he was 13, elders of his house decided to marry him to Kasturba Bai. Gandhi later saw no moral justification for such preposterous child marriages. He was brought up listening to the stories of the Ramayana, Harishchandra, and the Shravan Kumar, and they captured his heart. For him, they were the living realities. When he was in high school, a wave of reform was sweeping over Rajkot, and he, with one of his friends, ate meat. That went over for a year, and then he realized that lying to his parents, who were vegetarian, was worse than eating meat. Thus, he gave it up. He was 16 when his father died, and after completing his schooling, he went to England to study law in 1888. Before going, he vowed to his mother three things: that he would not touch wine, women, and meat, which he kept. He stayed first in hotel in England, then moved with an English family. There he tried to become an English gentleman and assimilate in the society. He started reading newspaper, wearing hat and tie, learned how to dance and play violin. But all this lasted for a few months, after which he started a simple life out of economy and hygiene and doing intense study. But it was hard being a vegetarian and finding a vegetarian restaurant there. Many times he had to sleep hungry. One day in a vegetarian restaurant, he found a book called Plea for Vegetarianism by Salt. That's the author's name. After reading this, he was so convinced that he became a vegetarian by choice and felt blessed that he took the vow. He got associated with the Vegetarian Society in England. Vegetarianism for him was not just about an ideal diet. Ethically, he agreed that the man's supremacy over the lower animals meant not that the former should prey upon the latter, but that the higher should protect the lower, and that there should be a mutual aid between the two as between a man and a man. Man eats not for the enjoyment but to live. During this time, he also visited Paris and saw Eiffel Tower, and he disparaged it. He quoted Tolstoy that the Eiffel Tower was a monument of man's folly, not of his wisdom. Tobacco, he argued, was the worst of all intoxicants, inasmuch as a man addicted to it was tempted to commit crimes which a drunkard could never do. Liquor made a man mad, but tobacco clouded his intellect and made him build castles in the air. The Eiffel Tower was one of the creations of a man under such influence. He says there is no art about Eiffel Tower. We can say that Gandhi was not a fan of big monuments that did no good to the humans except to serve them momentary pleasures. After finishing his law's bachelor, he came back to India in 1891 and practiced for some time in Bombay. But as he was still shy, he was not much successful. And when an Indian company contacted him to fight a case for itself in South Africa, he happily agreed and reached Africa in 1893, leaving behind his child and two children. While fighting the case there, he believed that once we adhere to the truth, the laws come to our aid naturally. This belief of his did not last long. It was in South Africa that he suffered prejudices for the first time, being a colored person. The famous incident being when he was traveling in first class by the train and still got kicked out, despite having the ticket. And once when he went for the dining, he was not allowed to eat in the common place and asked to eat in his room. And once when he went to the barber for the haircut, but he was refused as the shop was only for the white people. Then he realized how in India we Indians also not allow some of our brethren access to such common places. Humiliated by these incidents, he started fighting not for his own rights but for all Indians, who were called Coolie. there no matter what caste or economic background. He said the situation of the indentured Indian labor was not better than slave, and Indians were treated mostly just like the natives. He stayed there continuing his social activism and formed Native Congress, which united the fragmented Indian society as a political force. It was while being in Pretoria that he made some Muslim and Christian friends who gave him insights to the Christianity and Islam, but he vowed not to embrace any religion before he fully understood his own, that is Hinduism. Every book that he read on any religion left him with some questions except Gita. Gandhi might have been kept calling himself a Hindu, but his interpretation of Hinduism is very personalized. He disregarded Manusmriti for it supported the caste system and eating meat. It was during this time that Gandhi made religion of service his own. He felt that God can only be realized through service. However, he kept continuing reading many books on different religions. Gandhi here criticized Indians for considering business affairs a practical thing and religions the other. However, during a case in the courtroom, despite his inner resistance, he compromised and accepted the court's condition of not wearing a turban, saying, "When at Rome, do as the Romans do." After 3 years since he came to Africa, he sailed back to India and brought his wife and children. It was during this trip that he went to one of the Congress sessions and found it idle, which meets 3 days each year, and went to sleep then. When he returned to South Africa, he was welcomed by the crowd of native whites by brooms, stones, and rotten eggs. The two charges against him were first, that while being in India, he had indulged in unmerited condemnation of the native whites. Second, that with a view to swamping Natal with Indians, he had especially brought the two shiploads of passengers to settle there. These two things Gandhi proved that are wrong accusations and decided not to prosecute any of his assaulter, for he believed that white natives were misled at the moment and didn't know the truth. This doing of his was closely related to the Bible verse, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," and improved his stature among the white natives, for they were embarrassed for their conduct. While managing Natal Indian Congress, Gandhi gained further experience with managing such institutions and said, "Institution that fails to win public support has no right to exist." Gandhiji praised, like his wife, Indian women for their tolerance and sacrifices, but he was also greatly impressed by many of Western women with whom he came in contact for their hard work for the cause of justice. Among them was Miss Sleshin, whom Gokhale gave first place among Gandhi's co-workers, whether Indian or European, male or female. Gandhi did not like education imparted in Christian schools. There, thus he tried to teach his children at home. His perspective is rooted in the belief that true education should focus on character building, moral development, and practical knowledge, rather than mere literacy and Western style academic learning, and he called such schools as citadel of slavery. He was against corporal punishment. He claims that subjects like geography, algebra, and astronomy, which he himself studies, have not helped him in controlling his senses or becoming a better human being, which is more essential. He believed that each Indian should be well versed in their mother tongue, and additionally, Hindus should learn Sanskrit, Muslims should learn Arabic, Parsis should learn Persian, and everyone should learn Hindi or Hindustani as a common language. He was convinced that Indian parents who train their children to think and talk in English from their infancy betray their children and their country. They deprive them of the spiritual and the social heritage of the nation and render them to the extent unfit for the service of the country. He acknowledges that some kind of knowledge may be necessary, but only in a limited way and only for dealing with the British until they leave. He argues that a simple peasant who is honest, kind, and dutiful to his family is already educated in a true sense, and even if he cannot read or write. He asks, will literacy add an inch to his happiness? If education only makes him discontent with his simple life, then it has done more harm than good. He was convinced that for the proper upbringing of the children, the parents ought to have a general knowledge of the care and nursing of the babies. The child never learns in afterlife what it does in its first 5 years. A child's education begins at conception. Parents' physical and mental states at that moment influence the baby, and during pregnancy, the mother's emotions, desires, and lifestyle continue to affect the child. After birth, the child imitates the parents and relies on them for growth. Understanding this, a responsible couple will engage in sexual union not for their mere pleasure, but only when they truly desire a child. At this stage, Gandhiji was seriously thinking of taking the Brahmacharya vow. What circumstances or what work it was that set his thoughts in that direction?
I guess we'll never know.
But he tells us about a conversation with Raichand Bhai about Mrs. Gladstone's devotions to her husband, made him question whether devotion was more praiseworthy in a wife or an unrelated servant. This perspective deeply impacted him and leading him to realize that true faithfulness was not about mere physical attachment but about transcending lust. He acknowledged that his wife was never a temptress, that the real obstacle was his own weak will. This realization strengthened his resolve to take the vow of Brahmacharya, which he took in 1906. Brahmacharya means control of the senses in thought, word, and deed. Man, brute by nature, needs self restraint. It was while practicing celibacy he gave up milk and spicy dishes as he believed that they led to a heightened desires and passions, making it harder to observe brahmacharya. Trying to live a simple life, he started washing his clothes by own and cutting his hair, but still he was finding it difficult being a social activist and a family man. His spirit of self sacrifice was tempered by the desire to leave something for the future, and it took life insurance for the sake of family. He deeply believing the maxim that the man proposes and the God disposes, realized that the Almighty was the real protector and the numberless families goes without such insurance, and what right he has to rob his wife and his children of their self-reliance. He discontinued his insurance. Reading books like Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and the book which came his daily guidance, Gita, Gandhi was gripped by the words like aparigraha, which is non-possession, and sambhav, which is equability. How to cultivate and preserve that equability was the question. How was one to treat alike insulting, insolent, and corrupt officials, co-workers of yesterday raising meaningless opposition, and men who had always been good to one? How was one to divest oneself of all possessions? Was not the body itself possession enough? Were not wife and children possessions? Was I to destroy all the cupboards of books I had? Was I to give up all I had and follow him? Straight came the answer, I could not follow him unless I gave up all I had. Thus, he concluded that to achieve salvation, one should act like a trustee and regard not an iota of anything as its own. For him, the meaning of family widened. It now encompasses the whole world. Gandhi believed in earth and water treatments and sees modern medicine as a profession driven by self-interest rather than true service to the humanity. Gandhi believes that most diseases arises from people's own negligence and indulgence, and such as overeating and leading immoral lives. Instead of promoting self-discipline and natural healing, doctors provide quick fixes that allow people to continue their bad habits. He even goes as far as to call hospitals institutions for propagating sin, as they encourage moral irresponsibility, but has warned readers not to trust his words without experimenting, as a writer almost present only one aspect. It was in South Africa during this time, while prosecuting and trying to prove a white officer guilty, that he was sorely disappointed and got disgusted with the legal profession. He said,
The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers.
No, not exactly that. Even truthfulness in the practice of the profession cannot cure it of the fundamental defect that vitiates it. In the book Hind Swaraj, he compares the legal profession to prostitution, implying that it serves selfish ends rather than the justice, and claims that lawyers have contributed to the India's enslavement rather than its liberation. In 1904, he started the journal Indian Opinion and realized that the sole aim of journalism should be service. The newspaper press is a great power, but just as an unchained torrent of water submerges whole countrysides and devastates crops, even so an uncontrolled pen serves but to destroy. If the control is from without, it proves more poisonous than want of control. It can only be profitable only when exercised from within. If this line of reasoning is correct, how many of the journals in the world would stand the test? But who would stop those that are useless? And who should be the judge? The useful and the useless must, like good and evil, generally go on together, and the man must make his choice. Gandhiji, in his autobiography, accepted three key influences on his life. First, Rai Chandbai, a Jain philosopher and poet who deeply influenced Gandhi's spiritual and ethical outlook. Second, Leo Tolstoy. His writings, especially The Kingdom of God is Within You, set Gandhi's ideas on nonviolence and simple living. And third, John Ruskin. His book Unto This Last inspired Gandhi's vision of Sarvodaya, that is, the welfare of all and the dignity of labor. And from this book, Gandhiji took three lessons. First, that the good of the individual is contained in the good of all. Second, that a lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's inasmuch as all have the same right of earning their livelihood from their work. Third, that the life of a layer, that is, the life of a tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman, is the life worth living. Transforming these ideas into practicality, Gandhiji started Phoenix Settlement in 1904 in South Africa, which soon developed in a small village. Gandhi experimented his education methods in the Phoenix Settlement and later in other ashrams. Self-reliance and as possible physical labor was practiced at a farm, where children also helped. Gandhi said children as a rule never failed him. But in the same chapter, he accepted that due to his ideals, he kept his own children aloof from formal education and also sacrificed their literary training to the service of community, later becoming bone of contention between him and his eldest son. Not heartbroken, but he regretted that he did not prove an ideal father. However, he tried his best in those circumstances. Gandhi's first satyagraha initially, Gandhi used the term passive resistance, but found it inadequate as it suggested weakness and lack of action. To emphasize the strength and active nature of this struggle, he coined the term satyagraha, derived from the sat, that means the truth, and agraha means insistence or holding firmly to. Took place in South Africa in 1906 against the Asiatic Law Amendment Ordinance, that also called Black Act, which required Indians to register and carry identity passes. On September 11, 1906, he led a mass meeting in Johannesburg where Indians vowed peaceful resistance. They refused to register and publicly burned their passes, leading to arrest, including Gandhi's. After 8 years of struggle from 1906 to 1914, the law was repealed through negotiations. This marked Gandhi's first successful use of satyagraha, which was later applied in the India's freedom movement. During World War I, Gandhi still believed that the relation between British and Indians were not of master and slave. Colonization was more of a fault of an individual British than the British system. He thought that he could change them by love and expressed his readiness to be trained as an ambulance corps, which he had also done earlier during the Zulu rebellion in South Africa. Mr. Polak, a close friend of his, questioned his consistency of actions with his profession of ahimsa. Gandhiji explained that ahimsa is a comprehensive principle. We are helpless mortals caught in the conflagration of himsa. The saying that life lives on life has a deep meaning in it. Man cannot for a moment live without consciously or unconsciously committing outward hinsa. The very fact of his living, eating, drinking, and moving about necessarily involves some hinsa. Destruction of life, be it ever so minute, A votary of ahimsa therefore remains true to his faith if the spring of all his action is compassion. If he shuns to the best of his ability the destruction of the tiniest creature, tries to save it, and thus incessantly strives to be free from the deadly coil of himsa. He will be constantly growing in self restraint and compassion, but he can never become entirely free from the outward himsa. Then again, because underlying ahimsa is not the unity of all life, an error of one cannot but affect all, and hence man cannot be wholly free from ahimsa so long he continues to be a social being. He cannot but participate in the hinsa that the very existence of society involves. When two nations are fighting, the duty of a votary of ahimsa is to stop the war. He who is not equal to that duty, he who has no power of resisting war, he who is not qualified to resist war, may take part in war and yet wholeheartedly try to free himself, his nation, and the world from war. Another friend of him warned him of cunning people who will deceive him, for he is too trusting. That is true for some extent, as when serving in Zulu rebellion, British soldiers killed injured Zulus whom Gandhi was nursing, and according to soldiers, they misunderstood them to be the actual rebels. He said, a satyagrahi is born to be deceived, but ultimately a deceiver only deceives himself. Gandhiji was suffering from pleurisy and was advised by his friend and doctor and decided to move to India for warm climate. While sailing, he realized on ship that consciously or subconsciously there is a feeling at the heart of the Englishman that he is from the superior race and in of Indian that he is from the inferior race. Upon reaching India in 1915, Gandhiji created his first ashram called Sevashram in Ahmedabad. In 1917, in Champaran, Bihar, he led his first major satyagraha in India to fight for indigo farmers oppressed by the British landlords. This victory established his methods of non-violent resistance. He emphasized for the clean environment and improved sanitation conditions there. He also built schools and recognized the vital role of women in spreading his message and practices in these villages and educating villagers. Disintegrated service of the people in any sphere ultimately helps the country politically. It was also while at Champaran, Gandhi was monitored by CID, which helped him driving out its fear from the peasants' mind. In 1918, he supported textile mill workers in Ahmedabad and peasants in Kheda, Gujarat, who were struggling under unjust taxation during famine, further strengthening his mass movement approach. Here Gandhiji realized when the fear of the CID and jail disappears, repression put hearts into people. And then how could they be stopped for returning their insults? And experience taught him that the civility was the most difficult part of satyagraha. Civility does not here mean the mere outward gentleness of speech cultivated for the occasion, but an inborn gentleness, a desire to do the opponent good. These should show themselves in every act of a satyagrahi. From 1919, Gandhi protested against the Rowlatt Act, which led the nationwide unrest and culminated in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, of which Dyer held Gandhiji responsible. In response, he launched the non-cooperation movement, aligning with the Khilafat movement, which sought to protect the Ottoman Caliphate. However, after the Chauri Chaura incident in 1922, where violent protests erupted, Gandhi called off the movement and emphasizing his commitment to non-violence. By 1924, the Khilafat movement collapsed and the Gandhi shifted his focus to the constructive problems like Hindu-Muslim unity and self-reliance, setting the stage for future freedom struggles. Gandhiji said at a special session of Congress at Nagpur that to safeguard democracy, the people must have a keen sense of independence, self respect, and oneness, and should insist upon choosing as their representatives only such persons who are good and true. One must not be obsessed with the idea of numbers of representatives. In his last chapter, called Farewell, Gandhiji said, those who say that religion has nothing to do with politics do not know what religion means. Here we end our journey, and thank you everyone for watching. Like, share and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also write down in comment sections the suggestions and your views.